3, 2, 1, go.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of Troy City Council. It's Monday, November 21st, 2022. My name is William Lesh, President of Council. We'll begin tonight's proceedings with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance given by Mrs. Marshall. Please stand.
All right, dear Lord, we ask that you guide us to work together as a team and to have a productive meeting, enabling us to achieve great results. As it is the week of Thanksgiving, and many people will gather with their family, friends, and loved ones, I ask that everyone please say a little extra prayer for our first responders and our military that are far from home and are not fortunate to gather with those that they love, and pray that they are kept safe. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Marshall. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee.
Here.
Mr. Whidden.
Here.
Mr. Rozell.
Here.
Mr. Sievert.
Present.
Mrs. Marshall.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mr. Pierce.
Present.
Mr. Schilling.
Present.
Mr. Phillips.
Move to excuse Mr. Phillips.
Second.
It's been moved to excuse Mr. Phillips by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Whidden.
Yes.
Mr. Rozell.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips is excused.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read a summary of the minutes of the November 7th, 2022 meeting of Troy City Council?
Minutes of Council, November 7, 2022. Committee reports. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared approving a requested mortgage lien subordination for 107 West Main LLC. Law and Ordinance Committee reported regarding a Trex application of Shakti Petroleum LLC, and there was a motion approved to support that Trex application. Mr. Lutz reported regarding the work session of Troy City Council regarding streetscape options and submitted that report. There were comments on the agenda items. Resolution number R69, 2022, Employee Legal Counsel Buckley King was given second reading, adopted. Resolution number R70, 2022, file a notice of appeal in reference to case number 21 CV378 was given second reading and failed suspension. Ordinance number 057, 2022, subordinating a mortgage lien for 107 West Main LLC was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 058, 2022, a reappropriation was given first reading and was adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 8:05.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How does council wish to dispense the meeting minutes this evening?
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved to adopt the minutes by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Whidden.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We'll move on to committee reports. We have 4 reports this evening. The first one from the Community and Economic Development Committee, and Mr. Schilling.
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much. This is a report from the Community and Economic Development Committee. In the summary report, this committee members met November 14th to consider the petition filed for the annexation from Concord Township of 163.634 acres located on both sides of State Route 55 between Nashville and Wilson Roads. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to provide for 3 legislative items required by the state law related to the Eisern-Hugel annexation to meet the timeline of the state law for an expedited annexation. The committee supports emergency legislation and have respectfully submitted by Mr. Pierce, Mrs. Snee, and myself, Jeff Schilling, as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Are there any comments or questions on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Finance Committee with 2 reports, and Mr. Siebert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hopefully, Mr. Friggy will not knock the water bottle into my microphone while I read this report. This committee met on November 14th to review obtaining certain supplies and materials for calendar year 2023 through 2025. As suppliers will not provide firm bids on fuel items need to be quoted at the time quantities are needed and purchased on a lowest price basis at the time. Water meters can be bid for a 3-year period. The recommendation to council from this committee is that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to purchase gasoline and diesel for calendar years 2023 through 2025 on the open market as needed, and advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the supply of water meters and appurtenances at a cost not to exceed $297,000 each year, 2023 through 2025, and that is respectfully submitted, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Rozell, and myself as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. Any comments or questions on this report? Mr. Siebert, please continue.
The second report is to the adjustments to the part-time seasonal wage scale. The committee met November 14th regarding the hourly wage for various seasonal and part-time positions. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to be effective January 1, 2023 to amend the hourly rate paid to seasonal and part-time positions, including the swimming pool manager, that will reflect the impact of the January 1, 2023 adjustment in the Ohio minimum wage rate to $10.10 per hour. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Rozell, myself as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. Any comments or questions on that report? Seeing none, we'll end up tonight with the Safety and Health Committee and Mr. Twiss.
Thank you. Safety and Health Committee met November 14th to discuss the 2023 funding of the Miami County Health District. Troy's funding is based on the millage equivalent paid by the other political subdivisions in the county for the public health services. Troy's payment is funded from the general fund. The 2023 funding would be $375,217.04, an increase of approximately 2.55% above the 2022 funding. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to approve the 2023 funding to the Miami County Health District for public health services for Troy citizens in the amount of $375,217.04. Respectfully submitted by Christy Marshall, Jeffrey Whitten, and myself as chair, William Twiss.
Thank you, Mr. Twiss. Are there any comments or questions on this report? Seeing none, we'll open up for citizen comments for items on the agenda. We have 8 resolutions and 1 ordinance for discussion tonight. If you wish to address council on any of those items, you're invited to come to the podium, give your name and address, and you have 2 minutes to address council. Mr. Kerber is our timekeeper. Seeing none, we'll move right into resolutions. We'll ask Mrs. Knight to read the first resolution of the evening, Resolution R70, 2022.
Resolution number R70, 2022. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to file a notice of appeal to the decision and judgment entry of the Common Pleas Court of Miami County, Ohio, in reference to case number 21CV378 and declaring an emergency. This is the 3rd reading.
Mr. President, as the date for the appeal has passed and any action of council would have no effect and be moot, I would move that we would indefinitely suspend R70 2022.
Second.
Just for clarification, is that postponed indefinitely?
Yes. What did I say? Indefinitely suspend, postpone indefinitely?
Yes.
Second.
It has been moved to postpone indefinitely Resolution R70, 2022 by Mr. Siebert, seconded by Mr. Twiss. Any final comments or questions? Mr. Schilling.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, Mr. Kerber. Going forward, it would be possible that in 2023 that the city would still need legal counsel in this matter for the tavern building for this appeal. Would that be a fair assumption? would it be possible for us we may need to hire legal advice in 2023 regarding the tavern appeal?
Well, first off, I should note that there's a conflict of interest that prohibits me or prevents me from representing the city on this matter, so that's why the outside counsel was brought in.
Right.
So I can speak generally about administrative appeals. I can't speak specifically on this particular case. Generally, I would not think, but there could be a potential for requests for stays of certain actions and things of that nature that could give rise to a need for legal opinion, but it's my understanding that there hasn't been anything pending at this point in time yet, other than the appeal.
Okay, and then my second question would be is that if there would be a need for legal counsel, then our safety and service director would have the authorization to obtain the services of an attorney to represent the city, provided that it doesn't go over $50,000. Would that be a fair statement?
Generally, without, with hypotheticals, sometimes it's difficult to definitely answer that because there could be some variables, but I think that generally that's a fair assessment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Any other comments or
Well,
questions?
I guess the only point I would make is the only issue before the court, or before the council, is the motion on the notice of appeal. So I don't want to interrupt people's questions. You can ask whatever questions you want, but the very specific motion that's been made is relative to the notice of appeal and where that would go.
Right, but the reason I brought those questions up is that moving forward, we don't want our residents to be under the assumption that, we would never have legal counsel again on this matter, that there's a potential to require legal advice, and of course, Mr. Kerber can't provide that because of conflict of interest, and so therefore we would have to go out and hire this firm again in the future should we need legal assistance. And that's the only thing I want to bring out on this.
Yeah.
As a point of clarification, is this a motion that has discussion, or is this?
Generally, it takes the floor, that motion itself, yes.
That's what I thought.
It's in front of the body.
Are there any other comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell.
Yes.
The motion is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution of the evening, Resolution R71, 2022?
Resolution number R71, 2022. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into an agreement with the Miami County Public Defenders Commission for 2023. The 2023 cost would be $24,409.35, which is not increased over the prior year. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Schilling, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It's been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Abstain.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Move to, that was
That was-
adopted,
that
right?
was
Yes,
the-
resolution is adopted.
Okay. I think that was an adoption.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution of the evening? Resolution R-72, 2022.
Resolution number R-72, 2022. Resolution establishing municipal services for certain territory containing 163.634 acres, more or less, in Concord Township, proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is regarding the Eisern-Hugel annexation. This is a statement of services, first reading.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It's been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution? Resolution R-73, 2022.
Resolution number R-73, 2022. Resolution establishing buffer requirements for certain territory containing 163.634 acres, more or less, in Concord Township, proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is the second piece of legislation regarding the Eisern-Hugel annexation. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Schilling, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Three reading rule has been suspended. It's been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution? Resolution R-74, 2022.
Resolution number R-74, 2022, resolution consenting to the annexation of certain territory containing 163.634 acres, more or less, in Concord Township to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is the consent of the Eisern-Hugel annexation, first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second. It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution, Resolution R-75, 2022?
Resolution number R-75, 2022, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter an agreement with the Miami County General Health District for health services. This will provide for the payment for 2023, $375,217.04. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It has been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mrs. Snee. The three reading rule has been suspended. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next resolution of the evening, Resolution R76, 2022?
Resolution number R76, 2022, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into agreements for the purchase of gasoline and diesel fuel after bidding on the open market and awarding contracts on a lowest and best bid basis for calendar years 2023, 2024, and 2025. First reading.
Move to suspend.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted. Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the last resolution of the evening, Resolution R77, 2022?
Resolution number R77, 2022, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for water meters for the years 2023, 2024, and 2025. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It is moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mrs. Snee. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the only ordinance of the evening, Ordinance 059, 2022?
Ordinance number 059, 2022. Ordinance repealing ordinance number 062, 2021, establishing salaries of certain employees of the City of Troy, Ohio, and establishing new wage scale for certain employees of the City of Troy, Ohio. This is the seasonal salary adjustment based on the new minimum wage. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved to adopt the ordinance by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We've come to the end of our legislative schedule. We move on to communications and announcements. Mrs. Knight, do we have any?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to comments of officials. Mayor Oda.
I have no comments this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just several announcements. On Thursday and Friday of this week, we are closed City Hall, but refuse and recycling is on schedule. The Dye Mill facility will close Saturday, the 26th for the season at 3 p.m., so people can still stop at the facility all day Saturday. And also want to invite the public to Fire Station 11. I mentioned that the generator was here 2 weeks ago, that we were looking to schedule an open house. That open house has been scheduled. It is December 4th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Again, it is an open house. It's available to anyone. And then finally, just a note of clarification from the question about outside legal counsel. Again, as a general rule, yes, the council authorization limit is $50,000 per the state law. However, when it comes to legal counsel of any type, since the law director is our law director, duly elected, I do consult with him about the use of outside legal counsel versus he and his staff being able to do the work. So this would be no different if it arises. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Herbert.
I have nothing this evening, thank you.
Thank you, sir. City Auditor, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Thank you, sir. Do any council members have any comments that they wish to make this evening?
I do.
Mrs. Marshall.
I know, don't fall over, everybody. I would just like to recognize and thank Captain Kunkelman on his years of service and wish him well and congratulations on his retirement.
Since Christie took the sails out of my, wind out of my sails, I was going to say the same thing. In 1991, my wife served as the City of Troy prosecutor, and at that time came home and said, hey, there's this kind of cool cop and wants to go to dinner with us. And we took him up on that invite, and as we sat here 32 years later, 31 years, almost 32 years later, it's been an honor and a pleasure to meet you, work with you, establish a friendship that is goes beyond our professions, and you've always served with integrity and dedication, and you will definitely be missed. Mr. Kunkelman's retiring December 9th, and we definitely appreciate his service to the city and wish him nothing but the best.
Excellent. Do any other council members have any comments this evening? Seeing none, do any staff members have any comments this evening? We open up for audience comments. If you wish to address council on any topic, now is the time to do it. Please come to the podium, give your name and address, and take as much time as you wish to consume.
Jeff, you can come up December 10th.
Seeing none, this meeting stands adjourned. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
I'm just kidding.